Hi, I'm Greg, and welcome to the history of gaming. We turn on our consoles, our computers, and we play the newest and most awesome games. But like with everything, gaming has a history. And there was a crucial point in time where gaming as we know it might not have existed. Gaming was close to being, well, dead. So let's jump into it, and let's explore the history of gaming consoles. In the 1960s, millions of Americans had invested in TVs for their homes. It was pretty clear at that point that there was a huge potential for the market to grow. In 1969, yeah, I know, get it all out of your system. Ha ha ha, he said 19. Ralph Baer, who was working for Sanders Associates Incorporated as an engineer, began to investigate how to play games on a television, and if it was even possible. Between 1967 and 1969, he and his colleagues Bill Harrison and Bill Rush created several video game test units. This result was the Brown Box, a prototype for the very first multiplayer, multi-program video game system. Whoa, that's a mouthful. Sanders Associates Incorporated licensed the system to Magnavox. In 1972, Magnavox released the design as the Magnavox Odyssey, which, let's be honest, is a really cool name. This became the start of the gaming consoles. The Odyssey consists of a black, white, and brown oblong box connected by wires to two rectangular controllers. Looking at it from a modern day view, it's safe to say that it's pretty darn primitive. The way you played games was very different from how we play games today. The Odyssey was capable of displaying 3 square dots and a vertical line on the screen. Nothing close to something like GTA or Doom. The games were basically plastic overlays that you would stick to the television via static cling to create visuals for the game. Different games that use the same game card can have different overlays, which use the same controls but would change the way it looked. See it as a graphics mod or DLC pack. It sounds all complex, and it kind of is, but that's also where the game Pong was born. And I'm pretty sure everyone has played at least some sort of version of Pong. The game consoles were in the earliest stage, and of course competition would come to the market. You had the Pingotronic and the Atari Pong. Yes, the Atari Pong was in legal trouble for their use of the name Pong. The creators of the Odyssey were not too happy with it. Then the Dutch Telespiel, which was made by Philips, came out, followed by the Video 2000, Coleco Telstar, Color TV Game, and Champion 2711. All of them are what we consider the first generation of video game consoles. Of course, as we all know, another generation follows soon. The second generation is also known as the early 8-bit home consoles, which is from around 1976 to 1988. The first console of the second generation was the Fairchild Channel F. I know, it sounds like one of those local news stations, but I promise you, it's not. The Fairchild Channel F was released by the Fairchild Semiconductor in 1976. That's the actual name of the company, I kid you not. The retail price? Well, $196.95. Sounds cheap compared to the consoles from today. But if you take inflation into account, it will cost you, in modern day dollars, around $752.92. Whoa. Yeah, and you complain that the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 are expensive? Can you imagine that people actually paid that amount of money and couldn't even do even a fraction of what a modern day console can? However, the graphics went a huge leap forward. Well, for the time, of course. By today's standards, it's still pretty primitive. The Channel F was only able to use one plane of graphics and one of 4 background colors per line. Only 3 plot colors to choose from: red, green, and blue. That turned into white if the background is set to black, at a resolution of 128 x 64. The F8 processor at the heart of the console, was able to produce enough AI to allow for player versus computer matches, a first in console history. All previous machines required a human opponent. Of course, in 1977, the Atari 2600 came out. This is by far one of the most known older consoles. It had joystick controllers and it had Pac-Man. What else do you even want? The console was at the low price of $199, which in today's dollars is around $827.54. Yep, it was more expensive than the Fairchild, but it was more impressive. It sold around 250,000 consoles, which is pretty damn impressive. But there were 800,000 made, and in 1978, only a total of 550,000 units were sold. As of 2004, a total of 30 million units were eventually sold, which is absolutely not bad. Of course, the Magnavox Odyssey made a comeback with the Magnavox Odyssey 2, which was in collaboration with Philips. Around 2 million units were sold. Also, the Channel F2 came out, the Bandai Supervision 8000, and the more known Intellivision. All of them had their strong points and weaknesses, but the real game changers would have to wait until the third generation. So the third generation was from 1983 to around 1985. We had the Videopack G7400 and the Commodore 64 game system. And the market was being flooded, and a lot of games were simply bad. And the whole ET debacle happened. The game so bad that it nearly killed gaming as a whole. The market was seeing a decline. People simply didn't want to pay so much money for games that were basically all the same at that point. It was too expensive and the games were too horrible. Gaming was about to die. That was until the Famicom came around, or as we all know it today as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or in short, the NES. The price was $179, which in modern times would be around $419.23, which was still pretty expensive, but compared to many others, it was simply cheaper. It took the world by storm, and a total of 62 million units were sold worldwide. Super Mario Bros. Was the game that just saved the entire industry with over 40 million sales. Finally, gaming seemed to be back. Finally, something different. It was a huge win for gaming. To put it in perspective, the highest amount of units sold around that time was only 13 million for the Sega Master System. Other consoles could barely even hit 2 million. Then the fourth generation came around, which lasted from around 1987 to 1995. The 16-bit era was steaming, and of course the market started to flood again. Sega Genesis was selling very well and was a huge competition to Nintendo. But the Super Nintendo came out in 1990 and again took the world by storm with over 49 million units sold. The rivalry between Sega and Nintendo is comparable with the Xbox and PlayStation of today. Sega and Nintendo would never ever have their characters cross over, ever. It's funny because now they do. We have Sonic and Mario games, but in that time it was unthinkable. Just like how it's unthinkable to see Master Chief and Nathan Drake fight side by side. It's a silly idea, but maybe in the future it could happen. Atari at this point gave up. They had an idea for a console called the Atari Panther, but they decided to cancel it. However, they were preparing for the next generation. They knew they couldn't do anything more in the fourth generation, so they decided to prepare for the fifth. The fifth generation came around and it lasted from 1993 to 1999. Apple wanted to try to throw down with the big boys, Sega and Nintendo, by collaborating with Bandai to create the Apple Bandai Pippin. It did not sell well at all, with only 42,000 units sold. It ran a version of the Mac OS and sold so many things separately like the keyboard and other accessories, and don't even get me started on the damn controller, that it just didn't work. The first real big hitter in the 5th generation was the Atari Jaguar in 1993, who sold a little under 1 million units. It was the first 64-bit console. It launched the Jaguar CD 2 years later in 1995, but some could argue this simply killed it even more. People didn't want to buy an upgrade that soon, that expensive. Nintendo and Sony were working together on the PlayStation for a while, but due to differences, Sony and Nintendo parted ways. By the way, PlayStation, not to be confused with PlayStation. I think it's safe to say that this was one of the biggest mistakes for Nintendo, because in 1994 the PlayStation came out, and oh boy did it sell well. It broke all records by selling 102 million units worldwide. The Sega Saturn came out in 1994 and sold only 9 million units. The big Nintendo and Sega fight became a three-way fight, as the new kid on the block demolished both Nintendo and Sega. Something no one would have ever seen coming. The Nintendo 64 came out in 1996 and sold around 33 million units. The 5th generation champion was PlayStation, knocking out the 4th generation champion, Nintendo, with ease. The 6th generation came out. This was the generation where a lot of modern gamers grew up with. The Dreamcast started off the 6th generation with its high-end console. This was the last try of Sega to stay relevant. And in all honesty, it was an extremely good console. It had online multiplayer, something the consoles at the time didn't have. However, unfortunately for Sega, it was only 4 years after their Sega Saturn, and the Sega Saturn had so many expensive add-ons that people didn't really want to buy yet another upgrade so soon. It had great games like Shenmue, Jet Set Radio, and Taxi. Even though the console was amazing, all of these factors, plus Sega's financial problems, would mean that this would be the very last console Sega would ever make. The final nail in the Sega console saga's coffin was the release of the PlayStation 2 in 2000. People loved the PlayStation 1 so much, and the hardware and capabilities of the PlayStation 2 exploded in sales. Yet again, Sony broke records with 155 million units sold. The big console war was no longer between Sega and Nintendo. There was no war. It was only PlayStation. Nintendo tried to fight back in 2001 with their GameCube, but it only sold 22 million units. The reign of Nintendo was officially over. PlayStation would be the king of consoles. But in 2001, Microsoft surprised people with the very first ever Xbox. Also a console with online play and even better hardware than the PlayStation 2. Microsoft did what Apple never could. It successfully created a console that sold very well for a newcomer, and it beat Nintendo in sales. The Xbox sold 24 million units. Even though it wasn't even close to how many units the PlayStation 2 sold, it cemented itself in the gaming market with amazing titles like Halo Combat Evolved, Project Gotham Racing, and Dead or Alive 3. The 7th generation spanned from 2005 to 2012. The flooded console market was no longer flooded. You had the Game Wave and Hyperscan consoles, but they sold well under 100,000 units, and most people simply never heard of it. The Xbox 360 released in 2005, and because they knew that Sony would release their PlayStation 3, Microsoft tried to beat Sony to the punch and released their consoles early. It sold over 83 million units, which was a huge step forward. However, because of their decision to rush the console out early, it was plagued with bugs and problems. Consoles would overheat, consoles would break down, and soon a lot of customers would complain about the now infamous red ring of death. Nintendo was looking for a way to come back, and did what Nintendo did best: innovate. In 2006, they brought out the Nintendo Wii, which took the world by storm. Its unique way of playing games with motion controllers was so new, so fresh, that everyone wanted to try it. Over 100 million units were sold worldwide. But as we all know, most people stopped using the console once the fresh feeling wore off. a lot of families would still use the console as it was aimed specifically at the family market, whereas Microsoft and Sony were focusing on a more teen to adult market. In the same year, the long-awaited PlayStation 3 came out and sold over 80 million units. From the big three, they were last place this generation, mainly because the competition beat them at the punch. And then we arrive at the 8th generation, from 2012 to the present day. The golden and silver ages of consoles are over. Consoles would no longer sell over hundreds of millions of units. The first console to arrive in 2012 was the Wii U, which was seen as a failure, with only 13 million units sold. Even though Nintendo could not replicate the amount of units sold like they previously had with the Wii U in itself was a very good console. However, many didn't find it innovative enough, and families were still using the Wii. This didn't bother Nintendo much, as they were selling extremely well in the handheld market. It's safe to say that Nintendo was, and still is, dominating the handheld market. In 2013, Sony beat Microsoft to the punch by releasing the PlayStation 4. They would sell 70 million units, far surpassing Nintendo and Microsoft, which would release their Xbox One a little while later. The PlayStation finally took back the crown and was once again the king of consoles. Many fans of the Xbox 360 would be disappointed with the Xbox One, as PlayStation simply had better exclusives. The Xbox One had many scandals. The Xbox One would, for example, listen to what you say, and with its Kinect that would come with it, it was basically spying on people. Rumors started to spread that if you'd rent a movie on the Xbox market, that the Kinect would scan the room to see how many people were in the room. If it were more than 5 people, it would simply stop playing the movie. The other rumor that spread was that Xbox would not allow you to share your games with your friends, something console gamers have done for years. The Xbox One sold around 10 million units. Of course, the Nintendo Switch came out in 2017 and would be the last console to release as of recording this video. It sold around 19 million units, and it was a hybrid between being a handheld and a normal console. And that's the history of game consoles. From Atari dominating the market, to the big battles between Nintendo and Sega, to Sony fighting off both Sega and Nintendo, to Xbox and PlayStation dominating the market. The true winner might be the PlayStation, but it's the NES by Nintendo that saved gaming and changed gaming forever. And that concludes the history of video game consoles. What was your all-time favorite console? Mine is still the NES. And what do you think about this concept? If I would make a second channel making videos like this, would you think that's a good idea or not? Let me know in the comment section down below. And of course, I want to thank the patrons, and you can see their names over here. I'm not gonna lie, this was a long video to edit, but it was a lot of fun to make. I really hope that you guys think this is a good concept, or maybe that you even like videos like this. So I just want to say thank you all so much for watching, and I really hope that this was informational or at least interesting to watch. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.